Oh, honey, I am so ready to tell this one. There is a very specific, quiet dignity in a woman who works with her hands, and an equally specific, loud foolishness in a man who thinks wealth can replace wisdom. Settle in, make sure your tea is hot. And let's dive into the flower, the fire, and the absolute ruin of Leo Rossi. Here is our story. Part 1: The Weight of the Flower. I watched Leo Rossi, the 32-year-old heir to the Grand Royal Hotel, pack his imported leather briefcase with trembling, manicured hands, weeping over a severance agreement he was desperately trying to negotiate. 2 hours ago, he had held my termination letter like it was a royal decree, mocking my flour-stained apron and my orthopedic clogs in front of my entire kitchen staff. Now, hotel security was standing behind him, waiting to escort him out the back service doors, and the billionaire client he had tried to impress was sitting in the main dining room, asking me if I wanted to rename the restaurant after my grandson. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you right now. Just a single word in the comments lets me know you're sitting here at the table with me. My eyes snapped open at 3:15 in the morning, exactly 45 minutes before my alarm was set to ring. I didn't move. At 62 years old, waking up wasn't a sudden action. It was a slow, careful negotiation with my joints. I lay there in the dark of my two-bedroom apartment, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my 8-year-old grandson, Toby, asleep in the next room. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a heavy, frantic beat that felt entirely too big for my chest. It was the day. That's what I had been calling it in my head for 6 torturous months. The day. The day Marcus Ashford, the tech billionaire, and his daughter, Isabella, would arrive for the final tasting of her $2 million wedding reception menu. My throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed a spoonful of raw cocoa powder. I tried to swallow, but the muscles in my neck were tight, coiled like a spring ready to snap. Lying in the dark, I started doing the math. I always did the math when the panic set in. It was a compulsion I'd developed over 40 years of working in commercial kitchens, a way to impose order on a world that constantly felt like it was trying to slide out from under my worn-out shoes. If this tasting went flawlessly, if the Ashford contract was officially signed today, my executive bonus would be roughly $25,000. $25,000. I closed my eyes and visualized the numbers, written out in thick, black icing. That money wasn't a luxury. It wasn't a vacation to the coast or a new wardrobe. It was a lifeline. It was the exact amount I needed to cover the out-of-pocket costs for Toby's specialized physical therapy for the next 2 years. With just enough left over to replace the rotting tires on my 15-year-old Subaru station wagon and maybe, just maybe, fix the radiator in my living room that hissed like an angry snake all winter. But if the deal failed, I felt a cold, clammy sweat break out across my forehead, settling into the deep lines around my eyes. If the deal failed, the Grand Royal's new management would use it as the ultimate excuse. I would be nothing. I would be a 62-year-old widow, a dinosaur in a pastry kitchen, pushed out into an industry that only wanted 20-something influencers who knew how to use ring lights and edible gold leaf. I rolled over, my lower back screaming in protest, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up the room with a harsh, unforgiving blue glow. 3:17 a.m. No emails, no emergency texts from the prep cooks, just the heavy, suffocating silence of the early morning. I needed to sleep. If I went into this tasting exhausted, I might miss a detail. I might forget that Isabella Ashford abhorred the taste of synthetic almond extract and only tolerated the pure, Madagascar vanilla bean I sourced myself. I might overwhip the ganache, and if the ganache split, Isabella would lose confidence, and if the Ashfords walked, I would be stuck drowning in medical bills, for the rest of my natural life. I kicked the faded quilt off my legs. It was useless. The anxiety was a physical entity now, a buzzing current running through my veins that made lying still absolutely impossible. "All right, Clara," I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding raspy and old to my own ears. "We're up. We're doing this." I forced myself out of bed and walked to the tiny kitchen, my bare feet sticking slightly to the cheap, peeling linoleum. I filled the kettle, the sound of the rushing water, the only comfort in the apartment, while it heated. I went in my closet and pulled out my uniform. It wasn't a pristine, custom-tailored chef's coat with my name embroidered in sweeping cursive. I couldn't afford those, and frankly, I didn't trust a chef whose coat was perfectly clean. It meant they weren't doing the work. My outfit was practical. A pair of heavy-duty, black houndstooth kitchen trousers that I had washed so many times. The fabric was soft and graying at the knees. A standard issue, double-breasted white cotton jacket, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and my shoes. My shoes. They were thick, black, slip-resistant orthopedic clogs with custom arch supports. They were incredibly ugly, but they were the only reason I could stand on unforgiving quarry tile for 14 hours a day without my spine collapsing. I looked at the clothes hanging there in the dim light. They didn't scream luxury hospitality. They screamed worker. They screamed, "I am the engine that makes this place run, not the hood ornament." That was always my strategy. The old owner of the Grand Royale, Mr. Rossi Sr., had understood that. For almost 30 years, we had an understanding. He handled the handshakes, the investors, and the front-of-house glamour. I stayed in the back, up to my elbows in flour and butter, ensuring that every single bite of food that left my kitchen was a masterpiece of flavor, not just a pretty picture. But Mr. Rossi Sr. had retired 6 months ago after a mild stroke, handing the keys of the empire over to his son, Leo. Leo Rossi was 32, held a business degree from a school he paid too much for, and wore suits that cost more than my car. He didn't know the difference between a julienne and a chiffonade, but he knew exactly what color palette trended best on social media. Since the day he took over, my life had been a living hell of aesthetic realignments and brand synergy meetings. I drove through the dark, empty streets of the city, my Subaru rattling ominously every time I hit a pothole. I gripped the steering wheel so hard. My arthritic knuckles ached. "Just get me through today," I pleaded with the dashboard. "Don't break down today. You can explode tomorrow. I don't care. Just get me to the kitchen." I pulled into the employee parking lot at 4:30 a.m. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of the harbor and wet asphalt. I unlocked the heavy metal service doors and stepped into the sprawling, cavernous main kitchen of the Grand Royale. The lights flickered on, illuminating the stainless steel prep tables, the massive walk-in refrigerators, and my domain. The pastry station in the far back corner. It was my sanctuary. This was the place where I wasn't Clara, the struggling grandmother. Here, I was Chef Clara, the woman who commanded the sugar, the heat, and the yeast. I tied my apron around my waist. It was an old, heavy canvas apron, stained with the faded ghosts of 1,000 chocolate temperings and berry compotes. I liked it. It felt like armor. I immediately went into my ritual. It had to be precise. It had to be perfect. First, the ovens. I calibrated the convection dials to exactly 325 degrees. Next, my physical workspace. I pulled out my ancient, battered leather notebook. This wasn't a company document. This was my life's work. It was a handwritten compendium of every recipe, every ratio, every failure, and every triumph I had ever baked over 40 years. Its pages were crinkled from water spills, dusted with permanent fingerprints of cocoa, and filled with my cramped handwriting. I turned to the page marked Ashford, the white velvet. By 7 a.m., the kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. The prep cooks had arrived, the smell of roasting bones and mirepoix filling the air. I was in the zone, my hands moving with muscle memory, folding the delicate meringue into the cake batter. It had to be light, it had to be airy, but it had to have the structural integrity to hold 3 tiers of Swiss meringue buttercream. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the swinging doors to the main dining room burst open. The atmosphere in the kitchen changed instantly. The ambient chatter of the line cooks died away. It wasn't a sound that silenced them. It was the sharp, aggressive clicking of expensive leather loafers on the tile. I looked up from my mixing bowl. It was Leo Rossi. He was wearing a slim-cut, charcoal gray suit with a silk pocket square that matched his tie perfectly. His hair was slicked back, and he smelled overwhelmingly of bergamot and arrogance. But he wasn't alone. Walking half a step behind him was a young woman who looked like she had just stepped off a magazine cover. She was maybe 25, wearing a pristine, blindingly white, custom-tailored chef's coat that cinched at the waist, paired with designer black jeans and immaculate white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, glossy ponytail, and her lips were painted a bold, matte red. She looked like a stock photo of a modern chef. My stomach dropped. The cold dread I had felt in bed returned, heavier this time. Leo didn't greet the staff. He didn't say good morning. He walked straight down the line, his eyes scanning the stainless steel surfaces with an expression of intense distaste. He stopped right in front of my pastry station. He looked at the mixing bowls. He looked at the flour dusted across the table. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he looked at me. His eyes traveled from my graying hair, tucked haphazardly under a plain white skullcap, down to my stained canvas apron, and finally came to rest on my thick, black orthopedic clogs. The silence stretched for 4 seconds. It felt like an eternity. "Clara," Leo said. His voice was smooth, airy, and dripping with a condescension that made my jaw clench. "What exactly are you wearing?" I wiped my hands on a clean towel. "I'm wearing my uniform, Mr. Rossi. I've been prepping the Ashford cake since 5 this morning." Leo sighed, a long, dramatic exhale through his nose. He pinched the bridge of his nose, as if I were giving him a migraine. "We have the most important tasting in the history of this hotel happening in exactly 2 hours," he said, projecting his voice so the entire kitchen could hear. "We have the Ashford family arriving, billionaires, Clara, people who dictate taste for the entire eastern seaboard, and you look like a cafeteria worker who just finished scrubbing the grease traps." I felt the blood drain from my face. My line cooks, men and women I had trained, stared at the floor, too terrified of losing their own jobs to speak up. "This is a working kitchen, Leo," I said, my voice tight but steady. "I am covered in flour because I am baking a masterpiece. The bride specifically requested my white velvet cake. She loved the preliminary samples." "She loved the idea of the samples," Leo corrected, waving his hand dismissively. He stepped aside, gesturing to the young woman next to him. "Clara, this is Chef Julianne. She has 3 million followers on Instagram. Her pop-up in Brooklyn just got a feature in Vogue Gastronomy. She specializes in molecular deconstruction and visual forward plating. She is the new aesthetic standard for the Grand Royale." I stared at Julianne. She offered me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her perfectly lined eyes. "It's so nice to meet you, Clara," she cooped. "I love traditional, rustic baking. It's so nostalgic." Nostalgic. She made it sound like a disease. "Julianne is taking over the Ashford tasting," Leo announced. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "She has prepared a nitrogen-infused, deconstructed vanilla sponge with edible floral glass. It's modern, it's sleek, it looks incredible on camera." You can't do that, I whispered, the panic finally breaking through my professional facade. Isabella Ashford hates modern gimmicks. I spoke with her for 2 hours during the consultation. She wants warmth. She wants soul. She wants a cake that tastes like a memory. Nitrogen and glass will alienate her. Leo stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of his cologne was nauseating. See, Clara, this is the problem with your generation. You are entirely too rigid. You don't flow with the market. You don't understand the brand. You think a good tasting cake is enough. It's not. It's about the prestige. And frankly, he looked down at my shoes again, his lip curling in disgust. Your entire presentation is a liability to my brand. You look messy. You look old. It's depressing. I gripped the edge of the stainless steel table. I built the pastry reputation of this hotel, Leo. Your father trusted me. My father is in a nursing home. Leo snapped, the mask of the polite executive slipping, to reveal the cruel, spoiled boy underneath. And I am trying to drag his outdated, dusty establishment into the 21st century. I asked you to upgrade your look 3 times this month. I asked you to lose the clogs. I asked you to buy a tailored coat. You refused. I have severe plantar fasciitis, Leo. These clogs are the only way I can work a 14-hour shift, and I don't have the money for custom coats because you froze all department raises in January. I was shouting now, my composure completely shattered. Excuses, Leo said softly. He shook his head with exaggerated pity. It's always excuses with the old guard. You don't respect the aesthetic, Clara, and if you don't respect the aesthetic, I can't trust you with the clients. He turned to Julianne. Clear this station. Get your components plated. Julianne nodded and immediately stepped into my space, pushing my mixing bowl of perfect meringue out of the way. Don't touch that, I hissed, stepping forward. Leo stepped between us. Clara, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I am terminating your employment, effective immediately. The world didn't stop. The massive exhaust hoods kept humming. The ovens kept radiating heat, but my brain stalled, terminated. The math started instantly. A terrifying cascade of numbers. Bank balance. $412. Rent due in 6 days. $1,400. Toby's therapy bill. $800. If I lost this job, I lost the bonus. If I lost the bonus, Toby stopped getting therapy. If he stopped therapy, his leg muscles would atrophy. You can't, I gasped, the wind completely knocked out of me. Leo, please, I need this job. I have my grandson. I did all the work for this contract. Just let me plate my cake for the tasting. If they hate it, fire me tomorrow. Just let me finish. Oh, Clara, Leo sighed, sounding deeply inconvenienced by my humanity. It's too late. The optics are already ruined. You're causing a scene. You need to leave before the Ashfords arrive. He turned to the kitchen doors and snapped his fingers. 2 security guards, burly men in cheap suits, stepped inside. They had been waiting. He had planned this. Escort Clara to her locker to collect her personal items, and then see her off the property, Leo commanded. I looked at my line cooks. They were staring at their cutting boards, silent, terrified. I couldn't blame them. They had rent to pay, too. I turned back to my station. My beautiful, perfect cake layers were sitting on the cooling racks. Julianne was already pulling out sleek, black slate boards and canisters of liquid nitrogen. I reached for my battered leather recipe book. Sitting on the edge of the table, leave it, Leo barked. His hand shot out and clamped down on the cover. All recipes developed on company time are intellectual property of the Grand Royale. That book is 40 years of my life, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound. It blurred my vision. Half of those recipes are my grandmother's. Then you should have kept them at home, Leo sneered. He yanked the book from my grip. He didn't even look at it. He simply turned and tossed it into the large gray trash bin at the end of the station. It landed with a dull, heavy thud among potato peels and eggshells. It was an act of such casual, devastating cruelty that it broke something inside of me. The fear of eviction, the fear of the medical bills, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow shock. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked away. The security guards fell into step behind me. I walked down the long, fluorescent-lit hallway to the locker room. I took off my flour-stained apron. I folded it neatly and left it on the bench. I packed my civilian coat, my keys, and my purse as I walked out the back service doors into the cold, gray morning. The heavy metal door clicking shut and locking behind me, I felt like a ghost. I had spent 30 years inside that building, pouring my soul into every oven, and I was leaving with absolutely nothing. I was just an old woman in ugly shoes, standing in an alley, listening to the hum of the city, realizing I had just lost everything. Because I didn't look right for a photograph. Part 2. The perfect recipe. The rain started exactly 5 minutes after the service doors locked behind me. It wasn't a cleansing downpour. It was a cold, miserable, gray drizzle that soaked immediately into the wool of my worn winter coat. I didn't walk to my car. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting in the freezing Subaru, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out how I was going to look my daughter in the eye and tell her Toby's therapy was over. Instead, I walked around to the front of the Grand Royale. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to see the people who were about to eat the ashes of my career. I sat on a wrought iron bench across the street, hidden under the awning of a closed flower shop. I was shivering, the damp cold seeping deep into my aching joints. From here, I could see the grand glass entrance of the hotel. I could see the valets in their crimson coats. I could see the warmth radiating from the crystal chandeliers in the lobby. I sat there for an hour, doing the math of my own destruction. Sell the TV. $50. Sell the wedding ring I hadn't taken off in 40 years. Maybe $300 at a pawn shop. It was pathetic. I was cataloging my life for scrap parts. At exactly 10 a.m., a convoy of 3 sleek, black Cadillac Escalades pulled up to the curb. The valet scrambled. The heavy doors opened, and Marcus Ashford stepped out. He was a billionaire, but he didn't look like Leo Rossi. He was a large, imposing man with silver hair, wearing a dark navy suit that lacked any flashy labels. He radiated a quiet, terrifying authority. Behind him emerged his daughter, Isabella, wrapped in a camel hair coat, looking anxious and beautiful. Leo Rossi was waiting for them at the glass doors, bowing practically in half, his teeth gleaming in a desperate, obsequious smile. He ushered them inside like royalty. I sat on the bench, pulling my coat tighter. In my mind's eye, I saw exactly what was happening in the private dining room. I saw Julianne standing there in her pristine white coat. I imagined the hiss of the liquid nitrogen. I imagined the slate plates. I imagined Isabella taking a bite of a cake that tasted like science instead of love. I closed my eyes. Let it go, Clara. I told myself, it's not your problem anymore. 30 minutes passed. The cold was making my fingers numb. I finally stood up, deciding to face my ruined life and walk to my car. Before I could take 3 steps, the glass doors of the Grand Royale violently swung open. Isabella Ashford marched out onto the sidewalk. She wasn't wearing her coat. She looked furious, her arms crossed tight over her chest. A moment later, her father, Marcus, walked out behind her, his face a thundercloud of irritation. And then came Leo. He was literally running, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the wet pavement. He looked like a man who had just realized. He stepped on a landmine and was waiting for the click. Mr. Ashford. Isabella. Please, I assure you, it's avant-garde. Leo pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. He was holding an umbrella, trying frantically to cover them, but Marcus batted it away. It tastes like a sweetened sponge soaked in dry ice. Leo, Isabella snapped, turning on her heel. It was dry. It was flavorless. And there was literally sharp sugar glass in the center. I almost cut my gums. I told you, I wanted the white velvet. The cake I tasted last month. The one with the vanilla bean buttercream that melted in your mouth. Where is the woman who made that? Where is Clara? Leo froze. The color completely drained from his perfectly tanned face. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Clara. Well, Clara is. She's no longer with the organization, he stammered. We upgraded our culinary team to provide a more elevated, modern aesthetic for your high-profile event. Marcus Ashford stopped walking. He slowly turned to face Leo. The billionaire didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke with a low, deadly calm that carried perfectly across the wet street. Let me understand this, Leo. My daughter specifically requested the baker who created a cake she loved, and you fired that baker to hire someone who makes food that belongs in a science experiment, all because you wanted an elevated aesthetic. Sir, the influencer reach of Chef Julianne will bring millions of impressions to the wedding photos. I don't care about Instagram impressions, you idiot, Marcus growled. I care about my daughter's happiness on her wedding day. If Clara isn't baking the cake, we are pulling the entire event. The $2 million contract, the block of 200 luxury suites, the rehearsal dinner, all of it, canceled, today. Leo looked like he was going to vomit. Mr. Ashford, please. You can't. The cancellation fees. Sue me, Marcus said flatly. My lawyers will keep your firm tied up in discovery until your grandchildren have gray hair. He turned to his security detail. Bring the cars around. From across the street, I watched this all unfold. My heart was hammering a wild, soaring rhythm. Hope. It was the most dangerous drug in the world. I stepped out from under the awning of the flower shop. I didn't think about the rain. I didn't think about my wet hair. I just walked across the street. My orthopedic clogs slapping heavily against the wet asphalt. Excuse me, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. Marcus, Isabella, and Leo all turned. I was a sight. Soaked coat, gray hair plastered to my forehead, no makeup. I looked exactly like the peasant Leo had accused me of being, Clara. Isabella gasped. She bypassed Leo entirely and ran over to me, grabbing my cold hands. Oh my God, Clara, what happened? He said you left. I didn't leave, Isabella, I said quietly, looking directly at Leo. I was escorted out by security at 8 o'clock this morning. Mr. Rossi told me my flour-stained apron and my shoes were an embarrassment to the brand. He fired me. Marcus Ashford stared at Leo. If looks could physically incinerate a human being, Leo would have been a pile of expensive ash on the sidewalk. You fired the master pastry chef of this hotel on the morning of my daughter's tasting because of her shoes. Leo was hyperventilating. Mr. Ashford, it was a brand alignment decision. The visual presentation of the staff. Shut up, Marcus commanded. It was absolute. Leo snapped his mouth shut, his jaw trembling. Marcus walked over to me. He looked at my wet coat, my sensible shoes, and the deep, exhausted lines on my face. He didn't see an embarrassment. He saw a worker. Clara, I apologize for this fool. My daughter wants her cake. If I write you a check right now to rent a commercial kitchen anywhere in this city, can you bake it for the wedding? I looked at the billionaire. I thought about Toby. I thought about the math. $25,000. I could, Mr. Ashford, I said slowly. The gears in my head were turning, shifting from desperation to strategy. But there's a problem. Every recipe I have ever created, including Isabella's white velvet, is in a leather notebook, and Mr. Rossi threw that notebook into a garbage can in the main kitchen 2 hours ago. Isabella let out a horrified gasp. Marcus turned his gaze back to Leo. You threw her recipes in the trash. They are company property. Leo squeaked, stepping backward as Marcus advanced on him. Listen to me very carefully, Leo, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying rumble. You have exactly 10 minutes to go into that kitchen, dig that book out of the garbage with your own 2 hands, and bring it to this woman. If you do not, I will not only cancel the wedding, I will personally call every member of the hotel's board of directors, half of whom I play golf with, and tell them that your gross incompetence just cost them their biggest client of the decade. Leo didn't hesitate. He turned and practically sprinted back through the glass doors, shoving past a bellhop in his desperation. Marcus turned to me. My car is warm. Please, Clara, come sit with us. I sat in the back of the Escalade. The leather was soft, smelling of cedar and wealth. The heated seats seeped into my aching back, loosening the tight, coiled muscles. Isabella sat next to me, apologizing profusely as if she had been the one to fire me. 10 minutes later, the door to the SUV opened. Leo stood there in the rain. He was breathing heavily. His immaculate charcoal suit was wrinkled. His expensive silk tie was smeared with something that looked suspiciously like a mixture of old coffee grounds and mashed potatoes. He held his hands out. In them was my battered leather notebook. It was stained with wet coffee filters, but it was intact. He held it out to me like a peace offering. I didn't reach for it. I just looked at him. Clara, please, Leo said, his voice dropping to a frantic, pathetic whisper. Take the book. Take your job back. I'll double your bonus. I'll give you $50,000. Cash. Today. Just tell Mr. Ashford you'll do the wedding here. If they pull the contract, the board will crucify me. $50,000. The number echoed in my head. It was Toby's therapy. It was a new car. It was security. It was the bribe of a desperate man trying to buy his way out of his own hubris. I looked at his manicured hands holding my life's work. I thought about how casually he had discarded me. I thought about the influencer, Julianne, stepping into my station. He thought I was cheap. He thought my dignity had a price tag. No, I said. Leo blinked, raindrops dripping off his slicked back hair. What? Clara, be reasonable. 50,000. You need the money. HR told me about your grandson. The sheer audacity of him using Toby as leverage ignited a cold, hard fire in my chest. I reached out and plucked the notebook from his hands. I wiped a piece of wet potato peel off the cover. I do need the money, Leo, I said quietly, but I don't need it from you. I turned to Marcus, who was watching the exchange with intense interest. Mr. Ashford, I would love to bake your daughter's cake, and I would love to cater the entire dessert menu for the wedding, but I won't do it in a rented kitchen. What do you want, Clara? Marcus asked, a small, approving smile playing on his lips. I want the kitchen in the Grand Royale, I said. I know that kitchen. I built it. My team is there. Leo let out a massive sigh of relief. Oh, thank God. Yes, Clara, absolutely. The kitchen is yours. I'll have Julian clear out immediately. I wasn't talking to you, Leo, I interrupted, my voice cracking like a whip. I looked back at the billionaire. Mr. Ashford, you said you play golf with the board of directors. I do. Marcus nodded. I want to speak with them, right now, in the executive boardroom, I said, and I want Leo in the room. 30 minutes later, I was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table on the top floor of the Grand Royale. I was still wearing my damp clothes. My orthopedic clogs squeaked slightly on the plush carpet. Sitting across from me were 5 older men and women, the board of directors, looking grave and deeply alarmed. Marcus Ashford stood by the window, a silent, menacing shadow protecting his investment. Leo sat at the far end of the table, looking incredibly small. The chairman of the board, an older man named Davis, folded his hands. Clara, Mr. Ashford has explained the Situation: we are appalled by Mr. Rossi's lack of judgment this morning. We are prepared to offer you the position of executive pastry chef with full creative control and an immediate 20% salary increase. We need you to stay to save the Ashford contract. I sat in the comfortable leather chair. I placed my stained, smelly notebook on the polished mahogany table. I looked at the board. Then I looked at Leo. A 20% raise is generous, Davis, I said calmly. But it doesn't solve the structural problem. The problem is that the man running the food and beverage division cares more about the shoes of his staff than the quality of the food, if I stay under his leadership. The culinary reputation of this hotel will be dead in a year. You will lose more than the Ashford contract. You will lose your Michelin star. You will lose everything Mr. Rossi Sr. built. Davis frowned. What are you proposing, Clara? I am proposing a restructuring, I said, leaning forward. I will sign a 3-year contract. I will save the Ashford wedding. I will train the next generation of chefs in that kitchen. But my terms are non-negotiable. I held up one finger. First, my salary is doubled. Second, I receive a 5% profit share of the dessert and banquet division. The board members exchanged nervous glances. I held up a second finger, and third. Leo Rossi is removed from all operations involving food and beverage. He does not step foot in my kitchen. He does not dictate dress codes. He does not hire influencers. In fact, if I see him anywhere near the service elevators, I walk. You can't do that. Leo erupted, leaping to his feet. I am the majority shareholder's son. You are a glorified lunch lady. You can't dictate corporate policy. Sit down, Leo, Marcus Ashford said from the window. The billionaire didn't raise his voice, but the threat was absolute. Leo slowly sank back into his chair, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. Davis looked at Leo, then at Marcus Ashford, and finally at my notebook sitting on the table. The board was doing their own math. Leo's pride versus a $2 million contract, the wrath of a billionaire, and the hotel's reputation. It wasn't a difficult calculation. Agreed, Davis said with a heavy sigh. He didn't even look at Leo. Leo, you will be transitioning to a strictly administrative role in the back office, effective immediately, Clara. HR will have your new contract drafted by noon. I stood up. My knees popped loudly in the quiet room. I picked up my notebook. Thank you, Davis. I need to get back down to the kitchen. I have a cake to bake. As I walked out of the boardroom, I stopped next to Leo's chair. He was staring at the table. His hands clenched into fists, his pristine suit smelling of garbage. You should really look into getting some clogs, Leo, I whispered softly. Administrative work can be very hard on the lower back. 3 months later, the Grand Royale kitchen is humming. The Ashford wedding was the event of the season, written up in every major bridal magazine. Isabella sent me a handwritten thank you note and a massive bouquet of white orchids. The bonus paid for Toby's therapy in full, and I finally got the radiator fixed in my living room. Leo technically still works for the hotel, but I never see him. I heard through the grapevine that he was relocated to a basement office, managing the hotel's linen supply chain. He tried to start a luxury lifestyle blog, but it turns out nobody wants to take aesthetic advice from a guy who smells like dirty laundry. As for me, I'm the executive chef now. I hired 3 young, brilliant prep cooks who are eager to learn the old ways, and every morning, when I walk into that kitchen, I tie my old, flour-stained canvas apron around my waist, and I step onto the tile in my thick, black orthopedic clogs. Because I learned that true power doesn't come from a designer label or a polished photograph. True power comes from knowing exactly what you're worth and having the recipes to prove it. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing to Family Shock. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.